And our next speaker is Janet Hoult. Janet is a national speaker of the Theosophical Society in England. She served as a president at Nottingham Lodge for 10 years, between 2000 and 2010. She was assistant editor of Inside magazine and produced it for 3 years. She served on the board of the English section, and she's given talks and courses at previous summer schools, and together with her husband, Tony Maddox, has presented courses on the Mahatma letters and the secret doctrine. She's also given at headquarters for 3 years. Janet is at present the chair of the Blavatsky Trust, an independent charity for the promotion of Theosophy, which helps fund events such as this one, the conference, the European School of Theosophy, the Center for Study of Theosophy and Esotericism at the University of Copenhagen, and the production for Peace Martha. Her talk this afternoon, In Search of Balance. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you. The theme of this conference is healing oneself, healing the world. An important aspect of healing, both of ourselves and of the world, is trying to find some form of balance. When I chose this subject, I had very much in mind the second paramita from the voice of the silence, that of Shila, the key of harmony in word and act, the key that counterbalances the cause and the effect and leaves no further room for karmic action. Karma, we also have to consider the causes and effects of that. It's very important, as much is sent to test us as soon as we start to work on and heal ourselves. But when we start on ourselves, we may also become more effective in influencing and coloring the world around us in a healing and positive way. The voice of the silence, being chosen fragments from the Book of the Golden Precepts for the daily use of Lanus, disciples, is dedicated to the few. It was published in 1889, late in HPB's life, the year after the Secret Doctrine and around the same time as the Key to Theosophy. So this was a hugely important and productive time. She tells us that the book is one of the works put into the hands of mystic students of the East. The knowledge of them is obligatory in that school, she says, the teachings of which are accepted by many theosophists. The original precepts are engraved on thin oblong squares, copies very often on discs, and generally preserved on the altars of the temples where the Mahayana schools are established. Okay. She says, there are about 90 distinct little treatises. Of these, I learned 39 by heart years ago. She felt when preparing the voice of the silence that she did not want to translate more of them because she thought the world is too selfish and too much attached to objects of sense to be in any way prepared to receive such exalted ethics in the right spirit. And yet such ethics, she says, fill volumes upon volumes in Eastern literature, especially in the Upanishads. The Paramitas found in the third section, the 7 portals, give guidance on how to achieve some sort of balance and goal in our lives. They're an interesting and testing set of guidelines, but are things which we can start to do now, says HBB. But before we look further at that, let's consider what we're up against. What are we here for? what should we be doing in life? And we've had some excellent talks at this conference on how we can each go forward, especially the teaching and bringing into the modern world. There's all the books, the literature, there's a huge amount of material in the Theosophy. And the guidance and the advice really is timeless and is relevant to every age. HPB gives advice on how to approach this when she tells us in a piece about whether we should or not, we should pray to the angelic forces. She says that none of these are proper subjects for divine honors or worship. All are entitled to the grateful reverence of humanity, however, and it's very important, man ought to be ever striving to help the divine evolution of ideas by becoming, to the best of his ability, a co-worker with nature in the cyclic task. I feel that is so important. This is what we should be doing, to become a co-worker with nature in the cyclic task. So when we start to work on ourselves, what sort of things do we encounter? There are a huge number of unseen influences which surround us all the time and which the masters and HPB warn us about, especially thought forms which are continually influencing us. In the first letter of KH to A.O. Hume, dated 1st of November, 1880, the master describes how thoughts are propelled, how thought forms are created, and the energy behind them. He writes, every thought of man, upon being evolved, passes into the inner world and becomes an active entity by associating itself, coalescing, we might term it, with an elemental, that is to say, with one of the semi-intelligent forces of the kingdoms. It survives as an active intelligence, a creature of the mind's begetting for a longer or shorter period, proportionate with the original intensity of the cerebral action which generated it. Thus, a good thought is perpetuated as an active, beneficent power, an evil one as a maleficent demon. So man is continually peopling his current in space with a world of his own, crowded with the offspring of his fancies, desires, impulses and passions, a current which reacts upon any sensitive or nervous organization which comes in contact with it in proportion to its dynamic intensity. I mean, doesn't this chime with what we heard earlier about all the things that are around us? We're building thought forms all the time. They're going out from us and they're coming in. And they can throw us off balance at any time, often without our being aware of it. I mean, this is Tim and the cancel culture on another level. We're so easily influenced by these things and we don't know, and they're around us all the time. We tend to assume that such advanced persons of HPB and WQ Judge would have been impervious to these negative influences, but not so. HPB could feel negative thoughts coming to her. Countess Watchmeister tells us in her little book, Reminiscences of H.P. Blavatsky and the Secret Doctrine. And about the time when HPB said to me one evening, you cannot imagine what it is to feel so many adverse thoughts and currents directed against you. It is like the pricking of 1,000 needles, and I have to be continually erecting a wall of protection around me. WQ Judge was very badly affected by a sudden surge of fear and negativity whilst in London in 1884. He was badly affected by the magnetic atmosphere, and he later wrote that the magnetic atmosphere of London is horrible. And he wrote to a friend, today forenoon, I have had such an awful time as I never had. Awful. Such an outside pressure on me to go back to the US and any other fancy you can imagine. It's dreadful, oppressive thoughts. He knew that it wasn't him. He says there's no cause in it for me. For it in me, sorry. He finally recognized that he had this feeling every time he walked past one particular specific area in the Strand. So if we are at all sensitive, we are open to these forces at any time. And what can we do? We can erect a wall of protection around ourselves, like HPB. Judge found that several uplifting things helped him. Writing to his friend, looking at Sinner's pictures of the masters, a visit to the British Museum's Egyptian galleries, and especially the thought of seeing HPB and Olcott in a few days' time. This lifted him out of his depression. And we need basically to uplift ourselves with these profound teachings which Theosophy gives us. As was said earlier, meditation can help, and also remembering that there are positive influences around also. Look at the first object of the Theosophical Society, for example, perhaps the most difficult, to form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or colour. Now, this stretching out in brotherhood is to do with expansion. It's to do with love, of good thoughts going out. It's not constricting, but it's to do with the flow and the balance of positive energies. The Secret Doctrine in the Proem, HBB writes about the one life. And throughout Theosophical literature, it is emphasized that our own seventh principle, Atma, is part of the whole. And this is encapsulated in the third fundamental proposition, again in the Proem of the Secret Doctrine, where it describes the fundamental identity of all souls with the universal oversoul. I'm sure all of you here have most likely read the Proem of the Secret Doctrine, which provides a brilliant introduction to the basic principles of the Theosophical teachings. But if you haven't, it's absolutely brilliant. The Voice of the Silence offers a meditative view, but look at the messages of the masters as shown in the Mahatma letters, as well as the guidelines laid down in the Key to Theosophy. There are also 16 books of HPB's collected writings, as well as her teachings, which were taken down and are reproduced in the commentaries. But to return to something which we need to heal and balance us immediately, these are amazing teachings and maybe not easy to follow when we're struggling with life and all it throws at us, especially when we get engulfed by the pernicious vibrations of the world, especially the media sending out the messages of fear. We're all affected. The Voice of the Silence doesn't flinch in advice of what to do when we get some of these. It says, strive with thy thoughts unclean before they overpower thee. Use them as they will be, for if thou sparest them and they take root and grow, know well, these thoughts will overpower and kill thee. So don't give in to the negativity. You feel bad things coming in or going out. You need to keep positive. When we feel inundated by incoming bad thoughts and feelings, my friend Ron Chapman in Canada gives a very good piece of advice. He says, if you feel a negative thought suddenly arising, say to yourself, say to it, if you're not from the highest and best, go. There is no room for you here. And I found that very, very good advice, and it certainly helped me. I would suggest we try to deal with it with love, wherever it came from. It may be external. Remember those thought forms coming in, affecting us. Or it may be coming up from one's own lower self, because everyone here, I'm sure you'll know that as soon as we try and move forward and work on ourselves to become more spiritual, all sorts of questions, self-doubt and negativity arise, which is most likely our own karma and the things that we each have to work through. So what's the definition of karma? HPB in the Key to Theosophy writes, we describe karma as that law of readjustment which ever tends to restore disturbed equilibrium in the physical and broken harmony in the moral world. We say that karma does not act in this or that particular way always, but that it always does act so as to restore harmony and preserve the balance of equilibrium, in virtue of which the universe exists. That's on pages 205 to 206 of the Key, and is then followed by a whole section considering the nature of karma, with HPB drawing in several of the commentators. It's very illuminating. It's very good. So as Theosophists, we have to decide what we want to do, each one of us. Are we content to have our main aim in life just being to enjoy life, to indulge and ignore all this spiritual stuff? Or do we maybe just wonder that if we can do a little bit more, go a bit deeper, find out about what lies behind this profound and life-changing teaching which we have here? As I said earlier, Paramitas give guidance on how to achieve some sort of balance and goal in our lives. And they, to quote HPB, they're not for full-grown yogis and priests alone, but for all those who would enter the path. This is a quotation by, from a master, and it's quoted by HPB. These are the 7 portals, the paramitas of perfection, the 6 transcendental virtues in Northern Buddhism. HPB adds a 7th, which is the synthesis. We're told these portals lead the aspirant across the waters onto the other shore. And in Northern Buddhism, this is synonymous with reaching nirvana, or rather the entrance to nirvana. Each portal hath a golden key that openeth its gate. These keys are, number 1 is dana, the key of charity and love immortal. 2 is shila, the key of harmony in word and act, the key that counterbalances the cause and the effect and leaves no further room for karmic action. 3rd is kashanti, this is patience, patience sweet that naught can ruffle. The 4th is virag, indifference to pleasure and to pain, illusion conquered and truth alone perceived. 5, virya, the dauntless energy that fights its way to the supernal truth out of the mire of lies terrestrial. 6 is dhyana, whose golden gate, once opened, leads the Najal, that's the saint or the adept, towards the realm of Sat eternal and its ceaseless contemplation. 7th is prajna, the key to which makes of man a god, creating him a bodhisattva, the son of the Dhyanis. And if we can carry out these things, then we will grow. She also, a little bit later, cautions us against fear and getting dragged down by it. She writes, "Fear, O disciple, kills the will and stays all action. If lacking in that 2nd Shila virtue of harmony and word, in word and act, then the pilgrim trips and karmic pebbles bruise his feet along the rocky path." So how to deal with all this? How to achieve that balance, that Shila virtue? We need to listen to our hearts. And this is our hearts as opposed to our brains and intellect. These two are known in Buddhism and in the voice of the silence as the doctrine of the heart and the doctrine of the eye. HPB in the voice warns us to be wary of the doctrine of the eye, which was the work of the Buddha's head or brain. We need to follow the doctrine of the heart because the heart is the center of the spiritual consciousness, and we're told time and time again to be of clean or pure heart. Even ignorance, she says, is better than head learning with no soul wisdom to illuminate and guide it. And HPB has another piece of guidance, a shorter set of keys. It's written about a year after, for the achievement of balance in each of us. She writes, I add that gentle kindness to all beings, strict honesty, that's not according to the world code, but that of karmic action, virtuous habits, strict truthfulness, and temperance in all things, that these alone are the keys that unlock the doors of earthly happiness and blissful peace of mind, and that fit the man of flesh to evolve into the perfect spirit ego. So to finish then, she writes, the heart is the center of the spiritual consciousness, as the brain is the center of intellectual consciousness. But this spiritual consciousness cannot be guided by a person, nor can its energy be directed by him until he's completely united with Buddhimanas. Until then, it guides him if it can. That is, it makes efforts to reach him, to impress the lower consciousness, and those efforts are helped by his growth in purity. Hence the pangs of remorse for wrong done, the prickings of conscience, reproaching for evil, and inciting to good. These come from the heart, not from the head. In the heart is the only manifested God, and it is this manifested God that represents the triad Atma, Buddhi, Manas. The effort, however, should be continually made to center the consciousness in the heart and to listen for the promptings of the spiritual consciousness. For though success be far off, a beginning must be made and the path opened up.